In today's Lightroom tutorial, I'm going to stitch together a bunch of different raw files into one picture of this beautiful lighthouse in Scotland, and then I'm going to edit it into a picture that's going to look something like this at the end, while showing you every single process from the very start, showing you the whole workflow, every filter, every adjustment, every slider, and hopefully give you some inspiration and some new tips and techniques to use in your own editing. Alright, so what I've got here is all of these pictures, all of the raw files that we're going to use for the panorama, but before I'm actually going to stitch anything together, it's very important that you just go to any picture you would like, and then go into the lens corrections, click on remove chromatic aberration, so any of the purple and green fringing on the high contrast edges is gone, and also you want to make sure that you enable profile corrections, and just choose your lens, in this case the Canon 18-55 lens. And that will just get rid of the distortion as well as the vignetting, which is very important if you want to stitch these together in order to not get weird artifacts on the sides and on the edges. So once you've done that with one picture, you can just go to the last one, hold down Shift, and select all of these, click on Synchronize, just check all, and then synchronize. So you don't have to do this with every single picture, but rather just synchronize this adjustment with every one. So then we want to once again grab all of our pictures, right click and photo merge, panorama, and then you get this preview right here of what your picture is going to look like. I really like the look. If there's something that is really severely bad with it, then you of course want to go back before proceeding and figure out what the issue is. But this looks really good. So then you have a few different options. I generally like to stay on spherical, although you can also just play around with these different settings and see if you like it a little bit better, but I think spherical really looks the most natural. And then I would just click on auto crop, so any of the white edges are, gone. You could of course also leave them in and maybe try to clone, certain areas, but I really don't think it's necessary here. So then once you've done that, you just want to click on merge, and that will merge the panorama. This is gonna take a few minutes, but for you, it's just a few seconds. Alright, so I'm here after all of the stitching together is done, and now we have our full resolution panorama, and you can see it's really a lot of detail. It's almost 40 megapixel, the whole thing. But now what you want to do is just go into your cropping tool, and usually you will kind of have a little bit of overlap or, just stuff at the sides that you don't necessarily want. So you can just, crop that away to your liking, or you can also just go into the presets and maybe choose a 3:1 aspect ratio, which is kind of a classical panoramic aspect ratio. So that's what I'm going to do right here. And I think I want some of this hill, but at the same time some of these cliffs towards the left. And I think that looks pretty good, so let's press on OK. And just fine tune a little bit. So this is really an in-depth tutorial where I show you the whole process from start to finish without any skipping. And now we have a really nice starting base to edit further, and because this is all done within Lightroom, we still have the whole raw information with this panorama, which is absolutely great. And it's something that you wouldn't have if you would edit or, stitch together your panorama in Photoshop. So then let's actually get started with the editing, and for that I'm just gonna switch between kind of a more zoomed in aspect ratio and also the zoomed out one. And it's a really great idea to do that if you're editing a panorama, so you also see the kind of detailed adjustments in certain areas. So then let's get actually started with the actual editing, and I want to get this, I want to make this very punchy and contrasty, but at the same time I still want to remain some of that kind of gloomy, mysterious, almost stormy mood. So what I'm going to do first of all here is bring down the highlights by 100, just so you have a lot of highlight detail. And the shadows, actually, I really like to raise the shadows in most of my pictures, but here I really don't know if it works that well. So let's actually leave out the shadows for now and go to the blacks. Definitely you want to bring them down a little bit and also add some contrast. And yeah, I think I'll have to raise the shadows a bit at the end, but not too crazily, I don't want to make it look something like that. I still want to remain some of this dark mood. Then let's go to the whites and actually bring them up while holding down the Alt key. And you just want to bring them up, generally speaking, before anything clips, and that will just make everything very dynamic. Even within the foreground, it actually has quite a severe effect. Yeah, it definitely looks really good. Then after that, I'm gonna go into clarity, and here you really want to make sure that you both go into the minus as well as plus to kind of see what works better in certain areas. Because, for example, in some of the background here, especially in the water, I think minus clarity actually works pretty good. But for the overall picture, I do think I'm gonna go a little bit into the plus clarity and then just complexify and fine adjust certain areas in the local adjustments later. Then vibrance and saturation, nothing I want to worry about right now because I really have no idea of how vibrant I want the picture to be. But let's go into the color temperature, and here you just want to generally make sure that your picture is very neutral. In this particular case, I'm even going to go a bit more into the blue tones, and why I'm going to show you in a bit, and also play around with your tint. For example here, maybe just a little bit into the plus tint. So this is already the starting adjustment. Let's just quickly see from before to after. It looks a little bit more dramatic, especially in the clouds, as well as a bit more punchy and contrasty, especially here towards the shore. So then let's go on to the next segment of tools, and that is the tonal curve. And here I've got a really nice trick for you, and that is to go into the plus highlights. So you might think, especially if you look at the sky right here, it really blows everything and it's way too much. But the thing is, you just want to look at dynamic and not the exposure, because exposure is very, very easily fixable. So once again, just look at the dynamic of this picture as I go into the plus highlights. It looks so much more interesting and just dynamic. So it's always, most of the time at least, a good idea to go into the plus highlights a little bit. Then with the rest of these sliders, these are very, very different from photo to photo. So I would really suggest you to check it out, play around, go plus into minus, and then really stick with what works at the end. And as I said before, all of these tonal curve sliders, you just want to look at the dynamic and not so much at the exposure, because I'm gonna fix the exposure in a second anyways. So here, maybe just bring up the darks a little bit, and by the way, the lights and the darks in the tonal curve are just kind of the medium part of the respective highlights or shadows, whereas the highlights and the shadow slider is really about the very dark shadows, so you can really mix these together as well with the basic adjustments, equivalents, and really get the best possible effect. So for example, highlight slider in the top, it really just affects the highlights in a very broad way, whereas the highlights here really just affect the very, very bright parts of your picture. So once again, let me fine-tune the shadows and perhaps just make them a little bit darker. So after I've done that, let's just quickly see before tonal curve and after. Now, especially if we look at an area like this, it looks so much more dynamic and interesting and just, so much more refined. But also, it makes certain parts a little bit too bright. And if you would have the entire sky too bright, then you would of course just want to grab a graduated filter over the sky and just adjust the exposure there. But I really think it's only kind of this area. So what I'm gonna do instead is go and grab a rail filter, go into the minus exposure and drag one over here. Now this doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of very roughly over the area that you want to adjust, and then, just go a little bit into the minus, and once again, it doesn't have to be too perfect right now, because we're gonna fine-tune the whole sky a lot more in the local adjustments later on, but just for now, I think it's a nice fix in terms of the exposure. And now perhaps it's even easier to see the difference from before the tonal curve to after. And you see, once again, it's really all about the dynamic and not about the exposure. Then once I have done all of that, let's go down into the Hsl tool. And what you can do here is just adjust all of your colors in a very subtle way. So for example, hue, let's just grab this little pinpointer right here. And it's very important to know that you only can really adjust the very rudimentary colors. So for example, in this picture that would be green as well as blue, but that's about it. So you can't really adjust the different hues of the, respective green areas. Just go over one area that has one color and then bring either down or up your mouse and just see what it does to your picture. And in this case, I think I'm gonna go a little bit into the minus here with the hue in the greens and also go over the blues here and just see what I want to do there, and perhaps a little bit more into the plus for a little bit of a darker blue color. So if I just show you real quick from before that adjustment to after, it is a little bit of a difference, but at the same time it's nothing huge. So if you want to play around with this, you can, but it's definitely not necessary. But what I'm gonna do here is just cover everything for this in-depth tutorial and go down to the saturation and just do the exact same thing as I did above and just see what I want to do here. In terms of the saturation, I don't think there's really too much to be done in this particular picture. And then I'm gonna go down into the luminance and do the exact same thing. And here actually, you know what, I actually really like the plus luminance look. It really helps to get some differentiation. And let's go lastly into the blues as well and see what they do here. And maybe just a little bit into the plus as well. And let's actually see before any Hsl tool adjustment and after. It's a very detailed and a very fine adjustment, but it does change the picture. In this case, maybe a little bit more than in most pictures, but I do think it was worth here. So once again, you kind of see what it does now and how to use it. It's very subtle, but if you want to play around with it, then feel free to do so. Then split toning is actually a thing that usually tends to have a much bigger impact, and especially so in colorful pictures such as sunsets or sunrises. And this is not necessarily a sunset picture. It's a very simply colored and perhaps almost a bit, dull colored picture. So what I'm gonna do here regardlessly is just grab or click on this little box right here, and you can go through all of these different colors and see what they do to your picture. And as you can see, I'm in the highlights first, and what the great thing is that most of these colors, or all of these colors, will mostly affect the highlights more than the shadows. So for example, if you want to create some differentiation from shadows to the sky, that is a great way to do it. And even if you don't necessarily have an idea of a color scheme that you want to go for, it is still worth to at least play around with it and see the different colors and see if you want to do anything. So for example here, I really like the blue tones actually, but at the same time also the warm tones. So let's just see. Yeah, this is quite difficult. You know what, I think I'm gonna go with a little bit of a warm tone. First of all, go like crazy into the saturation and just fine tune my actual hue, and then go down into the saturation and really make it look natural and not overdone. And I really like this look, so it's only about 28 saturation into the yellows, but you can see it does change the picture by quite a bit. Maybe I'm gonna bring that down to around 24, but the great thing once again about the split toning is that you get all of this differentiation and the foreground is pretty much not affected at all, so that's really an amazing tool. And also compared to the temperature slider, which adds color very, very evenly over the entire picture, it is a great way additionally to just go into the split toning and fine tune everything there. So then let's do the same thing with shadows, and of course this will do the same thing except with the highlights, it will do it in the shadows. And this is a thing that I don't use too many of the times, but it is still worth to play around with. So in this picture actually, I think I'm gonna go for kind of a bluish tone in the foreground here, in the shadow parts. And yeah, I really like that look a lot. So once again, it is an amazing tool to complexify, and I would always suggest you to just go for kind of an, general neutral look with the temperature slider, at least in non-sunset pictures, and then really refine everything in the split toning. So here's before any split toning, here's after. It might be a little bit hard to see, so let me zoom in here. And you see in the sky, it just looks a little bit more mysterious and a little bit more pleasing, whereas in the foreground with the added blues, it really creates some differentiation and also a really distinct and kind of rough atmosphere. So I've covered the split toning for a long time. I think it's time to go on and let's go into the detail tool. And for that, you always want to make sure that you zoom in 1:1. And you just want to go over pretty much any area of your picture, doesn't really matter. And then you want to add sharpening. Now sharpening, depending on your lens and the conditions you took the picture, might differ, but I would suggest anywhere from around 50 to even 80 sharpness, depending on the picture. And even if you have a very sharp lens, as you know, I shot this with the Canon 80-55 kit lens, which is really not a sharp lens, but even if you have an L lens, it can be worth to add some sharpening to really get the maximum amount of sharpness and crispness out of your picture that you can. So in this case, I think around 60 works pretty good. Then once you've done that, just zoom out, bring the masking slider to the right while holding down the Alt or CMD key on a Mac, and you just want to make sure that everything that you want sharpened, so pretty much anything with texture, is white. So in this case, for example, the sky doesn't really have any texture up there, so by adding sharpening it would just introduce noise. So that is why you want to bring the masking to the right. And you don't have to get it perfect, you just don't want to make it look something like this, you know, something like that is already pretty good. But I think I'm gonna go a little bit more, just something like this. So now we have a significantly sharper picture, but then let's go on to the noise reduction. And noise reduction is actually a thing that I don't like at all. It is a thing that I would only suggest you to use if you have a ton of noise in your picture and or where you really don't see any other way to get around it. And the reason for that is because it will reduce your sharpness and your overall crispness and clarity of your picture by a lot. So even just going into the +40 here, if you're watching this in full HD, you're gonna see how much more plasticky and kind of less sharp the whole picture gets. So once again, I would not suggest you to add any unless you have a ton of noise. So then let's go down to the color slider, and the color is actually, I would call it color noise reduction because it fits a lot more. And what this will do is get rid of the purple and green sensor noise in your picture. And this is probably a thing that most of you don't even realize that you have. So you just want to bring that to the right. And once again, if you're going to watch this in full HD, you're really going to see the difference from before to after. And especially in the dark kind of shadow areas, it just makes the whole picture so much cleaner, so much crisper, because it gets rid of all of that sensor noise. And other than the noise reduction, it is not a trade-off at all. You know, if I play around here and go into the minus and plus, it really doesn't change the overall color at all. It really just has good effect, and as you know, for a Facebook picture it might not be super important, but if you're gonna print your photo or you just want the maximum amount of detail possible, it is a hugely important slider and so easy to use as well. Then lens corrections, of course you don't have to change anything if you've done that previously before stitching it together already, so let's go down into the transform. And transform is only really if you have architecture, so I wouldn't really suggest it for a picture like this. Let's instead though, it's a little bit, maybe just a little bit shifted from the left to the right, so let's go into the crop overlay actually, and just fix the horizon so it's really straight. So this is really a fine adjustment, but it can really help to have a very straight horizon. It makes your whole picture just seem a little bit more kind of refined and a little bit more professional. So it's a very small fix, but anyways, let's go down into the effects. And effects is for vignetting. And vignetting will help to get more attention on the center of the picture, but at the same time, of course, by adding darkness on the corners, also kind of set a more dark and maybe mysterious, stormy mood. So vignetting is actually a thing that I love to add in pretty much all of my pictures, at least about 80%. And I don't really add a ton like this in most of the cases. I really just go a little bit, maybe into the -10 to -20, and also play around with the midpoint. If I show you the extreme example, midpoint is just how much vignetting you have in the picture. And then also you want to bring the feather to the right, just so the whole transitioning from the darkness into the rest of the picture is a lot smoother. I generally like to go around 60 to 70 there. And then of course I'm gonna fine tune the amount at last and really go for a look that I like. And you know, yeah, I think I'm actually gonna go a little bit further than I do in most of my other pictures, which is kind of around -10 to -20. And I'm actually gonna go around -24, something like that works pretty well. And if I show you from before vignetting and after, it has a huge effect, really a huge one in this picture. It will not always be that much in every single picture, but as you can see, you see the possibilities and what it can have for a difference. And I really love this look here. It looks so much more dramatic and mysterious, and I really love it. So absolutely play around with vignetting. And down here you would also have grain, but don't add any grain, it makes your picture look terrible. Unless you want to go for a kind of a vintage old school look, don't add any. And the last thing that you have in the effects is the dehaze slider. And here, if you have really a lot of haze, it can be a good idea to go into the plus here. And the thing that I found out is that even if you don't have any haze in your picture, the way it adjusts your picture is just by adding a very subtle and a very fine contrast as well as kind of clarity equivalent. So for example, even if you don't have any haze in your picture, you can still play around with it and perhaps go a little bit into the plus or even into the minus if you want to go for kind of a washed out look, which might work for a winter picture or something like that. So in this case as well, I think I'm just gonna add maybe around 4 dehaze, so a very solid adjustment, but I do think it works. So then after all of these effect adjustments, and especially the vignetting, if I show you from before any to after, it works so much better with the actual picture. So then camera calibration will be the last global adjustment, and after that we're gonna go finally into the local ones. And here, first of all, what you have is profile, and you just want to go through all of these profiles and see what they do to your picture, how they look. And it's very different from picture to picture. There's no set tactic, because they will just kind of affect your whole color as well as lighting and hues and everything, just kind of the overall look of your picture. So once again, just go through all of them and at the end stick with whatever you like best. And the thing is, you can also do that at the very start of your editing, but I like to do it towards the end, because I generally have a better idea of what the picture is gonna look like and what I want the colors to look like. But of course, if you prefer to do that at the start, then you can also do that, according to your liking. So once again, let's just go through all of them again. I do think that this is way too much here, way too dark, and kind of the green tones don't like them so much. And camera landscape is something that will really make your picture very vibrant, works in sunset pictures and stuff like that, but not in kind of washed out or, perhaps stormy pictures like this. So then camera neutral, I really like this look. Perhaps it makes the grass a little bit too dark as well. And let's see, camera neutral here. Yeah, I like this, although it makes the greens a bit too poisony greeny. And let's go to camera standard at last. And I really like this look. So from Adobe standard, which is what we had at the start, let's just let Lightroom load all of that, to the camera standard, it's quite a big difference. But I like the look a lot. I think it works really well. But in exchange, I think I do have to go back into the basics and just bring up the shadows a bit more. Perhaps go back into the Hsl tool and just kind of make the green tones a little bit more distinctively green. And maybe even bring up the luminance within the greens. And I really think that works actually pretty well. So here's before that adjustment of the profile. And you can see camera standard in this case is just kind of a bit more even and perhaps boring, and afterwards I really like the look, especially in the foreground but also in the sky. I think it works so good for this particular picture. So once again, it is very different from picture to picture, but it is definitely worth to play around with and at the end see what you like best. So then after you've done all of that, let's go into the final adjustment within the global adjustments, and that are the primary color sliders. And what this will adjust is just the primary color. So for example, if I were to adjust the blue primary color, it will also affect the greens and, you know, all of the other colors in the picture, because they're of course made up of a certain amount of blue. So pretty difficult to explain, but more simple is that you just want to play around with these sliders as well, because unfortunately I don't have any set tactic here either. So it's very different from picture to picture, but I'm gonna do that relatively quick here and just go into the plus and to the minus and see what it does. It is really just to kind of fine tune and refine your picture even more at the end. And it can really have, I think, a pretty, you know, not a severe difference, but at the same time, it is kind of like the Hsl tool, a very subtle and a very detailed kind of adjustments to your color. So let me just finish that up here. It's kind of laggy a little bit. I'm gonna go, you know what, perhaps a little bit into the minus reds, perhaps, and go down to the greens. I think I'm just gonna speed them up because there's nothing to explain anyways. Alright, so long story short, I've just adjusted all of these sliders a little bit. As you can see, the most I've gone into either direction was into plus 13. And if I show you from before to after, that is including the camera profile, it is quite a bit of a difference, especially in terms of differentiation. I like the look before already, but it's a little bit perhaps too green, and at the same time a little bit not enough different colors within the different green shades and tonalities. And as you can see afterwards, it really helps that, and it just makes the picture look so much more refined and more interesting. Okay, so we're finally done with the global adjustments after this very, very long period. I really wanted to go in depth with every single slider and every single tool and show you the whole process along and pretty much just, you know, kind of give you an explanation of how I would edit a picture myself and really show you some of the different sliders and how I use them together and all of that stuff. But let's just quickly see from before to after. Huge difference already. I mean, from the raw file towards the left to the right, it's really one of the pictures that has one of the most severe impacts, the most severe difference from before to after. But at the same time, I think it looks very natural still, and it really helps the mood. So I absolutely love this picture so much. I love the look of it. But now I'm just going to refine it even more by going into the local adjustments. So the first local adjustment that I'm going to do is the graduated filters, and I'm just going to drag one over the sky right now. Want to make sure that you don't have a super soft edge, but at the same time not super non-soft. So just kind of in the middle, something like this works pretty well. And drag it over the sky, of course. And in this particular picture, even though I've made this area a bit darker already previously at the very start with the rail filter right here, I do think that the whole sky perhaps is a bit too bright still. So now I'm just going to bring down the exposure for the whole sky, and don't want to go too far with it, you know, I don't want to make it super stormy and super artistic, just kind of maybe a minus half a stop. And then I'm also going to play around with the contrast, which is a great way, especially with stormy clouds like this. You can really get so much more texture and just kind of more of an interesting look in your sky. And also you can do the same thing with the blacks and maybe even play around with the shadows, the highlights. And this is also very, very different from picture to picture. So once again, just play around with them and see what works best. But kind of as a general rule, if you go for a very, or if you have a very dramatic and a very stormy sky with all of the clouds, then going into the plus contrast, minus blacks, and also a little bit into the plus clarity can really work a lot of the times. So I do think that works. Let's see before that one and after. Now, once again, I don't think that the sky previously was really too bright. It was just not working with this very gloomy and very dark overall mood of the entire picture. So I think that really works a lot better. And maybe I'm just gonna fine tune that really quick here, but I do like the look a lot. So then let's actually grab another one just for the very top, and this time I want a very soft edge, and go a little bit more into the minus exposure and also add a little bit of contrast. So the reason I'm doing that is just so I have an additional sort of vignetting, and just so I have kind of a closing out of the whole picture. So as you can see from before that one, and I really like the sky once again, but afterwards it just works a lot better to contain your focus within the picture and not go away from it, but it also gets some nice differentiation within the exposure of the sky, which once again is all that I'm really caring about, is differentiation and dynamic and interest in the picture, so that is a really great addition to that. So then let's see if I want to add any other graduated filters. Perhaps maybe just a very small one on the bottom right here, and also just go a little bit into the minus exposure to also close out the picture from the bottom, and I think that is pretty much all I'm gonna do. So if I quickly see here before I go any further, yeah, I really don't think there's too much else to be done with the graduated filters. So then let's go into the let's go into the adjustment brushes first, and the adjustment brush, I usually use that for pretty much one purpose, and that is to add vignetting, additional vignetting over the picture. So for example, in this case, I think I'm gonna make this right side just a little bit darker, and you always want to make sure that your feather is at 100 if you do that. And towards the left, I really like the amount of vignetting, maybe just on the top right of the sky as well. And just here a little bit more, just fine-tuning everything and really get it perfect. So then, yeah, once again fine-tuning it, and then after all of that, I think it's finally time for the dodge and burning. And dodge and burning is one of the most important, most severe, and I think one of the most valuable adjustments that you can do to your picture. And what this is pretty much is just making individual parts darker or brighter, and that way you will increase your dynamic and differentiation and whole lighting scheme of your whole picture a lot. So the thing that you want to make sure is that your feather is to 100, that you invert the mask, and then you just want to kind of drag a filter over the picture. And before you actually do that, just look at the picture, see where is the lighting maybe a little bit dull. Now, in this case, I really think there's already quite a bit difference in terms of the exposures from dark to bright, but I do think I could kind of enhance and exaggerate some of that even more with the dodge and burning. So once again, if you have kind of an idea of where you may want to add some plus exposure or minus exposure for that matter, I always like to start off with the plus exposure first. Then you can just do that. Also mix that with whites perhaps, and even clarity, contrast, but another kind of important thing is color, and here you could even add differentiation in terms of the color. And you know what, I'm actually gonna go very in depth about the dodge and burning here as well. Why not? It's already a very long tutorial, and I'm gonna show you the whole process and really go in depth about it and do it pretty much as I would if I would edit a picture for myself. So here, as you can see, it's kind of maybe just a little bit dull right here, so I'm gonna add a filter right there. And it's always a good idea to just kind of look at your picture, then fine-tune the positioning first, and then also go into the exposure and the color and just fine-tune that as well. Because of course you want to make it look natural and don't add like a ton of color or exposure anywhere, which would make the picture not look natural. The whole idea of dodge and burning is just to exaggerate the lighting that is already there, and also to make some of the kind of dull and dark spots a bit more interesting. So for example, over here, I'm just gonna make a little bit more into the plus whites, a little bit more into the plus exposure, then right click duplicate, and once again, I don't want to go over the dark shadows in this particular, I don't know, in this shadow area right here, because it just doesn't look natural and you would get rid of differentiation that way. So once again, just gonna adjust all of these sliders, and by the way, you can just right click duplicate and rail filter and then just drag it over another spot, and it will be completely separate from the other ones, so you can really adjust everything, all of the sliders with every single one of them, which gives you the most amount of flexibility and also the most amount of creative choice that you can get. So then let's right click duplicate, perhaps another one over here, and dodge and burning is kind of a thing. Once you get the hang of it, once you've done it on a few pictures, then you kind of know what will work, where it will work, and how much of it will work. But until you get there, you just want to play around with it, try it out on a bunch of different pictures, move around sliders, and also move around filters, of course. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more plus exposure right here. And by the way, you could also zoom in so you have even more of a detailed view, and perhaps I'm just gonna do that here and add kind of a bigger one over the left side right here. So I hope this isn't too laggy, because this is a very hardware intensive task, especially with recording the whole process, but I think it should do fine. So there's not terribly too much to explain with the dodge and burning, but it's one of the most requested things to show the whole process of dodge and burning when I edit a picture. So I'm just gonna leave the whole process in, and you know, if you don't care about dodge and burning because you already know about it, then you of course can just skip ahead. But let's add another one over here. Once again, I'm gonna take as much time as I would if I would edit this picture for myself, and I'm not gonna hurry just for YouTube, because I assume if you watched this far and you're still here, then you really care about in-depth explanation of everything, and you know, not only want to see a technique, but perhaps get a bunch of different tips and methods to use in your own editing. So let's go over here as well. And the very important thing is, once again, don't just add a huge filter over one part, because then you're gonna make this whole part kind of boring, dull, and without it, as you can see here, we have a nice differentiation from the left being bright, going to the darker tones, going to the medium tones, once again going to the brighter tones. And it's really so much you can do with dodge and burning, and it's so important, especially if you have a landscape picture like this, where you already have so much different shadows and stones and kind of rocks and everything. You can really add so much differentiation. But anyways, let's finish that up here. I don't think there's terribly too much else to be done, maybe just another one over here. And yeah, for example here on this cliff, this could be a little bit more interesting, so I'm just gonna fine tune that right here and add a smaller one over there. Let's just see how it looks, and maybe adjust the sliders a little bit, right click duplicate, and perhaps just kind of a last one over the cliff right here. And once again, it's a very tedious and kind of time-consuming task, but it is absolutely worth it, and I want to explain you the whole process. So yeah, I think that actually looks pretty good. Let's just go over the whole picture once again. Now, also an important thing is that you don't overdo it, because it is important that you make it look natural. So once again, you don't want to just go into the plus exposure by a lot and, you know, add a filter like this. This is a thing that I see people do all of the times, but it's really all about the subtle differences that you don't even really notice if you wouldn't say anyone that you've added dodge and burning. It's really all about that. So if I show you before any dodge and burning, and that's gonna include this very big rail filter that I've added in the at the very start, but if you just look at the foreground from before any plus exposure dodge and burning to after, it's so much more interesting, so much more complex, and it might not have seemed like that at the start, but it really seems almost dull if you see the difference from before any plus exposure dodge and burning. It's really so much more interesting. And to be honest, you could go even more into detail here. You could zoom in 1:1 and to everything, you know, just on certain rocks, but I don't want to go too crazy here, and I think it really looks really good how it is right now. So now, as a very last thing, I'm actually going to add some minus exposure, dodge, and burning as well. And minus exposure is definitely not as important as plus exposure is, but in quite a lot of the cases it can still help to kind of remain some of that darkness and especially contrast in your picture. So once again, as you've gone over the already kind of bright or perhaps neutral spots with the plus exposures, with the minus exposure you just want to go over the already dark spots and just exaggerate those dark spots in certain areas to create differentiation, contrast, and an overall more interesting lighting scheme. So let's add another one over here, perhaps make that a little bit wider right here, go even more into the minus exposure, and you always want to fine tune it, make sure it looks natural, so really spend a lot of time here and, you know, do all of that so it really looks very interesting and at the same time very professional and not like overdone at the end. So then perhaps maybe just a very small one over here, you know, just make this part a little bit darker, then add another one, right click, duplicate, go over the other areas, and let's see here until it loads. I don't think there's terribly too much to be done in terms of the minus exposure. Once again, it's not quite as important as the plus one, but it still has a little bit of a difference. So at the end, I'm gonna say that I'm done here, at least with the dodge and burning. And actually, I think that I completely forgot is dodge and burning in the sky. And dodge and burning, you can also add in the sky. For example, here, I just really see a lot of opportunities. You mainly want to go into the plus whites and perhaps mix that with a little bit of exposure, and then just go over certain areas in the sky and, you know, once again go over the already bright spots and just exaggerate that there, for example here, then right click, duplicate, perhaps just kind of a cloud right here, really just with a hint of plus exposure, right click, duplicate, and here perhaps a little bit more, and also fine tune all of that. So then, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. There's usually not that much to be done in the sky, but it was a little bit of a difference. So let's now finally say that I'm done with the dodge and burning, and here is once again before any dodge and burning, and here at the end is after, and it's so much more interesting. It's really a huge difference. And actually, you know what? The thing that I've just noticed, because it also, if I go here into the enable or turn off, it also adjusts this rail filter that I've added at the start. I might just go to that one and not go quite as far into the minus exposure, and that is so some of this, or this entire area is still a little bit brighter than the rest, which also creates differentiation and interest. So I think that is it. Let me think. Yeah, might as well just go super in depth at the end, because a thing that I really like to do at the very end of any editing on my pictures is just go back to the basic adjustment especially, and pretty much the whole global adjustment, just look at the picture, see if I want to fine tune something, also just play around with some of these sliders for a final time. But I don't think there's really gonna be too much here, perhaps maybe from -28 in the darks to around, yeah, -25. So it's really all about the fine tuning right now, and it's not that important, but I wanted to include it because once again I'm showing you here the whole workflow that I use without any cuts, without any skipping. I'm really trying to give you the whole and full package here. So with that said, I think I'm done with the entire picture, and let's go here into the history and see where we started at with the raw file, which of course we've converted into a panorama at the very start, but it's still the raw file nevertheless, and it's a huge difference. I don't know how else to say it, but it's a completely different picture. It looks so much more, if you see the difference from before to after, it's so much more refined, it's so much more workable, it's so much more contrasty, while at the same time I think it's not overdone, especially if you look here closely. I mean, there are so many very interesting, subtle, local adjustments. And at the end, if I look through the whole picture, I really don't see anything that looks unnatural or perhaps overdone or anything like that. I absolutely love this picture. Now, to be honest, I had no idea how I'm even gonna edit this picture at the very start. Usually I try to, kind of pre-edit and then give you a very structured and a very concise whole tutorial. But this is really how I would edit a picture for myself and show you the whole process without any sort of skipping at all. And I think this is one of my all-time favorite pictures at the end. It has such a special mood. Yeah, I really think I got the most out of this picture. Even just the left part here, from the foreground into these shacks to the kind of harbor area or whatever that is, to the lighting scheme on the water, to the different textures on the water, to the bright highlights in the sky. There's so much going on. I absolutely love this picture. And by the way, you can clearly see that there is this, what's it called, this line or whatever. This is probably a thing that I would edit out at the very end as well, either with the spot removal tool or just in Photoshop. Probably would work better. But I think that's pretty much self-explanatory, and it's gonna be maybe another 20 minutes if I really do it in depth in Photoshop. So I'm just gonna leave that in because I don't think it's terribly, too bad for this picture. And once again, it's all about the channel editing, the channel styles. So thank you very much for watching and sticking around so long. I do appreciate that, and because I didn't really pre-plan this tutorial, I might have repeated some of the elements and some of the adjustments more than I should have, but I hope you don't mind so much, because once again, in exchange for that, I get to give you the whole process as I would do it myself, which I think is more valuable for your own editing. But anyways, if you would like to see more videos like this one, other Lightroom tutorials, Photoshop videos, and other photography videos, usually way shorter than this one, then be sure to subscribe. And also, if you could either give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, it would be hugely appreciated. It really helps me out to see which kind of videos I should do in the future. Because if this hour-long video is gonna get a lot of dislikes, and even better so if you could give me a comment with what you didn't like or what you did like, it really helps me to improve my videos and ultimately decides on the future videos that you're gonna see on this channel. But anyways, that was it for today. I think I stole enough of your time. Once again, thank you very much, and keep on editing great pictures.